Well, hello out there in podcast land, and welcome back to the Front Row Movie Reviews podcast, a podcast for people who actually like movies. This is Lou, and I am riding solo today. This is a new venture for me. I have never gotten a chance to review a new film, and I thought I'd jump on and do this one for a couple of reasons. One, I'm a huge fan of the subject, and it's a Netflix movie, which means I actually get to see it and I don't have to try to find a babysitter. So I was excited to talk about a new movie and a movie I've been anticipating. You guys can keep your Justice Leagues and your Thor Ragnaroks. Nothing wrong with the superhero franchise, but me, I am a comedy nerd from way back. So I was very excited about the new Netflix release of Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, with a very special contractually obligated mention of Tony Clifton. Yes, that is the full title. This movie dropped on Netflix on Friday, and I'm here just to give you some quick thoughts and some rapid thoughts because I just finished the movie about 10-15 minutes ago. So not only is this the first time I've done a podcast by myself, but this is the first time I've done it just kind of winging it. And I'll be honest, after watching this movie, I don't know if this is going to be more of a review than a therapy session, because short response is I absolutely loved the film. To give you an idea of what it's about, in case you haven't heard, in 1998, Jim Carrey was cast to play Andy Kaufman in the film Man on the Moon. He then decided to have all of his backstage and off-screen antics followed with a camera, footage for what might be promotional pieces or behind-the-scenes film. And what they captured is Jim Carrey going full into Andy Kaufman to the point where he became Andy Kaufman the minute he walked on set to the minute he left. So we never actually see Jim Carrey on the set. So what we see is Jim Carrey immersing himself in the persona of Andy Kaufman and what that meant. And we get an interview with present day Jim Carrey. He's the one who leads us through this film to talk not only about the process of turning into Andy Kaufman, but what that meant during the filming of the movie, and how that kind of related to everything that had built up in his career to that point, and then even the impact that it has after. And so it's a really fascinating portrayal because if you don't know who Andy Kaufman is, this movie gives you that. It gives you a little bit of a primer in the beginning. But really, this movie is about Jim Carrey in many, many ways and how the parallel him and Andy Kaufman sort of converged at this moment and really seemed to alter Jim Carrey, the human being, who I think even Jim Carrey, if I say, well, what's a human being? If you follow Jim Carrey lately, you know that in recent years, he seems very much more aloof, and he seems more distant, far cry from the Jim Carrey that we have seen or had seen at the height of his fame. He's very much kind of made peace with that former part of his life and is now in this new area where he doesn't seem to feel the need to impress anyone. He doesn't seem to feel the need to really do much of anything. And I think he even says that one point in the film. And I think some of that has to do with going back to the beginning of the film where he talks about his persona and crafting this comedic persona and finding a kinship with Andy Kaufman and how he really wanted to portray Andy Kaufman. And in order to do that, he felt he had to become Andy. So let's just dive into a couple of the themes of the film real quick. And I don't know if real quick's the way to respond because there's a couple of different levels this movie works at. It works first as this idea of what acting really is. And there's a debate amongst actors, and as someone who has studied acting and has gone to school for it, there's this debate of, okay, in order to become a character or to portray a character, you really have to become a character. But then there are also some people that say, no, acting, like anything else, it's acting. You put on a persona, but you take it off. You can separate yourself. And Jim Carrey in this movie shows that he does not do that. He truly becomes Jim Carrey or Andy Kaufman to the point where there are some really mind-blowing sequences in this film, because as you see the behind the scenes of the film, you see Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman talking to people from Andy's real life, and Andy and those people talking as if they're talking to Andy Kaufman. And Andy Kaufman passed away in 1984, and this movie is being shot in 1998. Man on the Moon's being shot in 1998. And so this surreal quality of watching real people converse with Jim Carrey as he's Andy Kaufman. And it's, again, this idea of, are they playing along with Jim Carrey? And in some moments, they don't appear to be. There's one scene in particular where Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman is arguing with the actor Gary Becker, who plays Andy Kaufman's dad in the film. And Gary Becker is immersing himself as Andy Kaufman's father. And their argument is so real and tangible that the makeup artist in the trailer breaks down into tears over it. And so the lines get blurred in such a way. And then the exact opposite of that is maybe one of my favorite parts of the film. Again, not only am I a comedy nerd, I'm a wrestling nerd. So the sequences that involve Jerry Lawler, because famously, Jerry Lawler and Jim Carrey got into a confrontation on the set of Man on the Moon, and this actually shows it. And what we see leading up to it is that Andy, I guess I should say, or Jim, whoever you want to say, is really antagonizing Jerry Lawler on the set. And you see that Jerry plays along with it for a while and then has kind of a breaking point with it. And I got to imagine that's what a lot of the people on the set might have felt. And you see that where there are all these looks around, what are we watching here? Who is this? And then when you add the third persona that we haven't talked about yet, which is Tony Clifton, which is Andy Kaufman's alter ego, who plays a significant role in Man on the Moon. So we see Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman as Tony Clifton. Now, the joke was always that Andy Kaufman was not Tony Clifton, that Tony Clifton was a real person. And they would even go so far as to have Kaufman's writing partner, Bob Zmuda, play Tony Clifton at moments where Andy would be off doing another show, as ways of just tricking the audience. So it's interesting to see how those three things just kind of merge. And what we get really out of the film is a real thoughtful rumination from Jim Carrey in the interview segments about how he spent all of his life crafting a comedic persona that then the world expected of him, and then he never wanted to do again, or that and it really, you can see in the film that Jim Carrey struggled and maybe still struggles for a long today with this concept of who am I if I'm not this person, or the conflict that happens when once you give somebody a persona and people now expect that persona. What happens when you don't want to do that persona and you just want to be you? And then who are you beyond what other people think of you? It is a mind trip on a lot of different levels, on a lot of philosophical levels, not helped by the fact that Jim Carrey himself is delivering a lot of these interviews with this almost dead-eyed sincerity where you wonder, even is what he's telling me to put on? I don't know. Is this the new Jim Carrey persona? I don't know. And it is so much in line with the history of Andy Kaufman, because for those who are unfamiliar with Andy Kaufman's comedic routine, that's what he would do. He would put on these characters that were different, or these acts that eschewed what you would expect from a traditional comedian. A lot of the times he would antagonize the audience. He would bomb on purpose. Or when he took Tony Clifton, he would specifically berate the audience and yell at them in order to garner a reaction. And it peaks during his wrestling career when he decides he's going to be a wrestling villain and wrestle women in the early 80s, when the curtain hadn't been pulled back on pro wrestling yet, and people were still wondering, what am I hearing, or is this real? There were many people who thought this man was really wanting to beat up women, which is made him hated, and it killed his comedy career in a lot of ways. But it was his commitment to those kinds of bits where even when the cameras weren't rolling, there was always this mystery to him. And what I find interesting is that the film Man on the Moon got criticized when it came out for not peeling the curtain back more and getting you in the mind of Andy Kaufman. And after watching this movie, I start to realize what a perfect choice that is for that movie. I don't think anybody could get into Andy Kaufman's head, because I don't know if anybody can get into Jim Carrey's head. And it shows what a perfect choice Jim Carrey was to play Andy Kaufman, because Jim himself is this man who seems very concerned or very committed to creating these roles and immersing himself in it. So much so that you almost wonder for the man's mental stability. So a couple of other scenes that I just wanted to highlight is there's a great scene on the Universal lot where Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman as Tony Clifton is going through the Universal lot, and he invades Steven Spielberg's office, and he wants to see the shark. He wants to see Jaws. It's probably one of the funnier moments of the movie, maybe second to where Jim Carrey recreates one of Andy's bits about causing confusion as to who Tony Clifton is, where he goes to the Playboy Mansion. Jim Carrey is invited to the Playboy Mansion, but Tony Clifton shows up, and everybody assumes it's Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman as Tony Clifton, just as the had gone with his immersion into the role. And so he goes, and Tony Clifton parties at the Playboy Mansion, and there's shots inside the Playboy Mansion. And then when the real Jim Carrey shows up, and we realize that that was Bob Zmuda as Tony Clifton, the look on Hugh Hefner's face is priceless. It's a great moment of levity, but the movie also has some really somber tones to it. And especially as the film, the documentary of Jim and Andy tracks the Man on the Moon film from beginning to end, and it makes it feel as if the final scenes of Man on the Moon were the ones that were shot last, which I'm not sure about, but I'm assuming that that's what's going on, because they talk about how in the final scenes with Andy Kaufman getting sick and dying of lung cancer, and they show the scenes where he's very frail and weak, Jim Carrey remains committed to Andy Kaufman, and it's almost as if Andy's dying again. And it was just this, it really caught me off guard of, oh, he's committing that much to it, because all the interactions that he has prior to this, when they're not shooting scenes for the film, is him talking as Andy as if he's a real person, but Andy knows he's making a movie about his life. And yet when they get to the part about the dying, he kind of commits to that to the point where it is like watching Andy Kaufman pass away again, which was really bizarre and but emotional too. And the other part about it that's emotional is just listening to Jim Carrey tell stories about this need that he has or had to be who people thought he wanted to be, and then kind of becoming disenchanted with that. And not to, I don't know how much you can spoil a documentary as much, but when you hear him talk about going back to the real world after being Andy, it's almost as if Jim is trying to craft a narrative where you see a shift in him as a person and then as an actor from this moment, as if this is kind of a fulcrum point to his career, which if you look at it from kind of a broader sense, it almost is, because he had done a lot of, his big comedies were in the early 90s. This is 99. And then by the 2000s, he's doing some more serious films. He did Eternal Sunshine. He does, and then he kind of moves on to the family movies where he kind of distances himself from that wacky persona that we grew accustomed to. And how much of that was because of this movie, or how much of him was just wanting to venture as an artist, I think is interesting. But they use a lot of clips, not just from Man on the Moon and not just from the behind the scenes footage, but this really does provide maybe the best retrospective we might ever get of Jim Carrey's career, because it's through his own words. And so we see a lot of clips. There's a lot of clips from Truman Show, especially has a real pivotal part in this movie and in Jim Carrey's story. And they draw a lot of parallels between Truman Burbank, Andy Kaufman, and Jim Carrey, which was really fascinating to watch. But there's also some great interview clips of Jim Carrey on Arsenio, and you can see that Jim Carrey was somebody who was influenced by Andy Kaufman from the beginning of his career, and then, you know, getting to play him really seemed to be this big payoff. A couple of other things that I thought about this film is just this notion that Jim has now with what is real. And, you know, if you've heard Jim Carrey in interviews lately, you can hear him talk about, you know, this kind of metaphysical plane and this notion of what is real. Is this real? And he kind of doesn't believe that what we're doing on this earth is real. And I can't even process that on my own right now, but I'm just going to say, but it's interesting to see how a lot of that stems from playing a man who blurred the lines of what was real in his comedy. And you didn't know how much of Andy was real and he was all about playing characters that you back, and it's all this kind of elaborate ruse. So how do I recommend this movie? Well, I won't do I guess I'm going to keep it in line with Jim Carrey, because I'm not going to give it stars or anything, because stars would be just labels, man. And I'm not going to. So in the spirit of this movie, I'm just going to tell you, I think this is a must watch for anyone who is either a fan of Jim Carrey, a fan of Andy Kaufman, a fan of the process of acting, and wants to kind of see what somebody who's totally immersed in their character 24/7 would act. And, you hear these, stories of the old Hollywood days, or there's the famous Dustin Hoffman Marathon Man story. But this is maybe the best we'll ever get to seeing how somebody does that. So I don't think you need to see Man on the Moon to enjoy this movie. I think if you've seen it, you're going to enjoy it even more, especially if you liked the movie like I did. But they show enough of the film in this that maybe it'll pique your interest to watch the movie, which I highly recommend anyway. But I don't think that needs to be a primer for this film. I think you can go into it and they give you enough information about who Andy Kaufman is, and as to why they might want to do a movie about him, because he really was a groundbreaking comedian. He was somebody who at the time was very polarizing, and whose appreciation has only grown because when you're not in the bit, you can sit back and watch it and understand what it is. And maybe that's kind of the point of what he was trying to do philosophically, is getting us all to just look back on the world from this outsider perspective and see the joke. So I don't even know where to go with that, but I definitely think you should check it out. It's on Netflix right now. It's an hour and a half. It's paced very well. Chris Smith's the director. It's done by Vice News, who they do fantastic documentaries, and this isn't this meets that bar. So I think it's well worth checking out. And also worth checking out are all of the shows that we have available for you on the Front Row Movie Reviews Network. You can go to our website, www.thefrontrowmoviereviews.com, where you will find everything that's out there. This is the second Jim Carrey movie I'm talking about this month. The new Guilty Pleasures with Batman Forever will be released, one of the two. I'm not sure when anything's happening, but we've got all sorts of stuff. Check us out. There are too many to mention, but I hope you get a chance to check out this movie, and leave me some comments, because I would love to just have a deep dive of this movie with some people on our Facebook page, on the YouTube page, on Twitter. You can find me at The Fake Lou Hair or at Front Row Reviews with a Z. But for now, I'll leave it at that. So this has been Lou Hair, and as always, we'll see you in the front row.